for clicking on the video. In this track, we talked about global governance with Matthew Sanders, CEO of Humanity 2.0, and Vivien Riener, who is a social innovation expert in Germany. We pondered questions such as, how can we create a constantly evolving government? And how does individual contribution stack up to government contribution? And I know that each and every one of you are going to love this conversation. So stick around, and without further ado, here's the Trek. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. I'm Madison. I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our community members and two special guests, which you will get to hear from in just a moment. And today we're talking about global governance. We start off with the word association. So once you see your name on the screen, give a brief introduction and say your 1 to 3 words.
Hey guys, my name is Angel, located in Maryland. I'm 18, I'm a first year. And when I think of the phrase global governance, I think of culture of care. I think that right now, as we stand, we don't necessarily prioritize or even decide to think or rank the needs of others. Especially when we think of it on a macro scale as country to country. I think that in order to get through all of the pressing issues that we have right now, climate change, endless wars, etc., we need to prioritize care and cooperation.
Okay, cool. Hey everyone, my name's Ashley. I'm 17 from Vancouver, Washington. I think of coordination, love, and flourishing. Coordination because I recently read this thing called like Meditations on Moloch or something. And like, I just was blown away by how like the lack of coordination and our lack of ability to make decisions collectively and stick by them causes so many problems. And then love and flourishing because I think like even just in the past few hours, I've kind of realized the need to be able to flourish, like love to like expand your sense of self, and flourishing because true flourishing is when your flourishing doesn't like compromise other people's ability to do so. And that was really interesting to me.
Hi, my name's Thanasi. I'm 18 from New York City. The one word I'll go with is inevitable. And I spent a lot of time diving into a book called The Singularity is Near. And I think that like the singularity and that part of technology, I think that global governance is inevitable, but it's our game to win or lose. Like we can either destroy the world or make it a lot better. Don't know which one yet, though.
So, hi, my name is Chabu. I am 19, based in Toronto. I'm also a first year at U of T. And when I think of global governance, the two words that come to mind are perpetuate or accountability. And perpetuate in the sense that global governance can either perpetuate oppression throughout the world, or it can perpetuate a culture where like we are supporting one another in the ways that we can and should. And then I also think accountability in the sense that like it's really easy to fall into the mindset of like doing things to support yourself or like doing things to support your nation exclusively without taking into account the implications that has on a wider scale. So I also think it's an important mechanism in creating accountability and making sure that we take each other into account in decision making.
Hi, I'm Anna from Germany, and I think that there are two words that came to my mind were responsibility. So we have responsibility for what we do and and how we help each other. Yeah, and the second one is variety. So it crosses borders, and yeah, it's just I don't know the word in English, so yeah. So yeah, I think variety, that's the word.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm 25 and I'm from New York. So my one word would be community. I think just because community has gone back centuries, that's who we are as humans. We always come together in a group. And on a whole, we are one big community, but the only way for us to really progress and flourish is to stick together in smaller communities and grow stronger. And as we were talking about on our last call, it varies from place to place. And I just think community is at the core of all that.
Yeah, hi, my name is Vivien. I'm also joining you from Germany. I'm from a mid-sized town called Freiburg in the southwest of Germany, so near the French and the Swiss border. Yeah, when I think of global governance, I think about the concept of borders. So how are borders, what are borders made up of? Like, what's the concept of borders, and how do they divide the world into containers somehow? Yeah, that's I think a very strange thought. Yeah, how borders are made, something like that. And the second thing is global citizenship, because I think, like, if we have global governance, there needs to be a sense of global citizenship and also education for that. Yeah, thank you.
Looks like I'm up next. When I think of global governance, I'm going to go ahead and say the next generation, because it is a Star Trek reference, of course. And I saw Gary unmuting there. And no, but I think that, you know, we don't really have a good model for how this works and how to unify the entire world under one government. And so we need to look at fiction to understand where we can try to go with that.
My name is Matthew Sanders. I'm the CEO of Humanity 2.0, and I'm based here in Rome. I'm 38, I think. I don't know. I have more of my initial reaction, just to be honest, was eye roll. Mainly because my associations with global governance haven't been overly positive. So, you know, if I had to put a word to it, I'd say potential. But if I had to add something, another word after that, I'd probably say unrealized.
Hey, I'm Gary. I'm one of the co-founders of CU. I'm calling in from Aurora, Illinois. And the word that I would use is people are skeptical, right? I think there's never been like probably more of an abundance of conspiracy theories about what global governance is doing, more like to us instead of like with us. So really on top of my mind, how do we not fall into that trap?
Yeah, and then I would just say common objectives, because if we want to create effective global governance, we first have to identify like an overarching common goal and then like common objectives within it, or else it's pretty futile and overall ineffective. But yeah, thank you all for sharing your word associations. Now we can get into the actual conversation. So if anyone has a question or provocation they want to pose, go ahead and shout it out and we can start talking about it.
One that I've actually just been talking about with some people is when you expand the scale of government as to something as wide as the entire globe, how do you have representation that is still grounded in the individual people who are being governed, and representation that has to then care about those people?
I guess when I think about like government and scale, when I think about global government, first of all, my mind always goes to like our notion of government is definitely not what a global government would look like. Like the United Nations is the closest thing we can relate to, and it's the United Nations. So, but I think that there's just a huge potential in governance being a lot more devoted to just individual and communal growth in different areas than management. The government has never been good at managing things, in my experience. So.
I would say that first of all, I agree with Thanasi. I don't think I can personally conceptualize a form of government as big and as functional and as vast that would be able to just manage the sheer amount of diversity that this world has to offer us. But I think that the first step is just radical democracy, radical enfranchisement, paying attention to grassroots organizers who know what's going on in their communities, setting up a structure that allows them to participate in a meaningful way. So, so that the voices of the least of these can be heard. I know it's very difficult, and there are definitely downsides to, I don't know, the structure that I just posed. And it's also very vague, but I think that in order to have a global government, or to practice global governance that truly serves the needs of the public, of the general will, of everyone that's represented in this big blue planet, we definitely need to figure out a way to instate true democracy in which people can actively participate in and not feel as if their voices are being minimized or altogether quieted.
I think that like what's really cool about this question is that you bring the idea of like the individual and like global communities. And so in the same way that like every individual matters and has value and is valid, I think that a really important like tangible step we can take when it comes to global governance is just like equitable validity. Like every single person or nation, quote unquote, has added value, means something. So like a small country in sub-Saharan Africa should have as much leverage and voice in global governance as a country like the US or France. And I think that that's like not the most, I feel like that's like a bit of an out-of-pocket suggestion considering the way that our current structures exist, but it is necessary in the sense that like the way that they've been disempowered over the years, this is a really easy way to kind of give them that empowerment by putting them on equal standing. And so in institutions like the UN or the World Bank, they very much don't have that leverage or power in those spaces. And you can tell that by like the committees that they belong to and, you know, who has vetoing power. And so I think that a really easy way to kind of respond or address to that is to just say that everyone has as much leverage and voting power and influence in this space as the other.
Can I pose a question?
Go for it.
So in an ideal world, what are the goals or what's the purpose of a global government? Because we're talking about representation and decision making and stuff. So
Ashley mentioned it earlier, but in her word association, she mentioned flourishing. And I think that should be the foundation of any global government, or the purpose / mission statement of any global government, just to protect and ensure that people can flourish without, literally what Ashley said, compromising the flourishing of another person. Gary, you did like a brainstorm about the like a vision of the future the other week, and I got to read it, and it was very powerful. I think that at the end of the day, we just need to ensure that people's rights to live and live a good, meaningful life are protected, and that they don't hinder the rights of other people to do the same.
Yeah, a group of the community members, drafted that, high-level flourishing doc, like different spheres of flourishing, individual, relational / community, and then like nation and world. And a big thing that we are talking about more and more is that if you don't have that vision, if you don't have these definitions of what flourishing means, you're going to get nowhere in terms of mobilizing resources and attention, right, to building that vision.
I'd like to quickly go back to Thanasi's question, I think. What's the purpose of global government? I think it's really important to distinguish between a government and a governance, because global governance already exists, I mean, these are the processes that we try to use to, just to face the global challenges and problems that we can't solve as a single nation. So that's exactly the reason why institutions like the UN exist, or the European Union, in fact. So from my side, I think it's really important or really interesting to see, because, the European Union is a fairly new thing. So at first there were just several nations in Europe, and now we've got this government, this institution that has certain authorities and certain rights to decide. And it's really hard for local people. So I don't know who said that earlier, but like the idea that really every single individual has the chance to really say something and have their voices heard is really, really, really difficult already on this European level, and I think it's just a very interesting process going on here, because the European Union has so many challenges just for itself to get the different perspectives in order, or the different needs of the several nations here. But it's the only way, I think. So that's my opinion. You need to organize in bigger institutions in order to work on those really, really big global challenges. Yeah, but it's hard. I think the thing that's mostly needed for that is really good leadership, and that's where citizen education kicks in.
Do you I guess the three people from the EU here, the EU was created as like more of an economic bloc in the beginning, right? And it kind of evolved into this from coal transportation to onwards. Do you think that the reason there are so many challenges transnationally with culture clashing and all that stuff is because it was founded upon something that's not like intrinsically beneficial for every citizen? Like it's not the economy's great. Yes, money's great. My point is that, it doesn't like provide for the needs of all the citizens first. It's kind of founded upon the economy up.
Oh no, but that's such a great call out. Wow. Like the foundation was about like GDP, right? Like how we're not going to really talk about flourishing if literally at its core, its constitution was designed to protect like economic interests.
I'm 100% punting to the Germans on this, because although I live in Rome, I'm actually Canadian, so I'm not going to touch this. So,
all right. Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm really suspicious about that too. Like yeah, it's really interesting that that's the way everything started, right? So kind of the real values, and of course, I mean, the human rights have always been in the core of the European Union, but I think bigger challenges than just the economic system, like climate change, all these things, they came after that. So I think they're having a lot of trouble just figuring out how to challenge, or how to face these challenges, because yeah, as you said, it's not the main reason. It's not one of the founding principles, really. So it's like when you start to build a house, you first have to build the basement, right? So and it feels like now we have like, yeah, you really have to think about what to build first. And it feels like we have big challenges now that weren't in the concept from the very beginning. So now you have to, you have to fix a lot of things. So yeah, I think for something, for institutionalizing a global governance, you'd first have to really agree on the principles that they'll be founded on in order to make it work.
Yeah, Thanasi, I think this is such a cool call out, because I think overall systems, institutions, whatever it may be, are pretty good at achieving the objectives they set out. Like, if we talk about the education system, what was it designed for? Like, it's meeting the original objectives. And so we need to think about, like, oh, maybe the reason why these systems aren't working is because, like, what they're founded on. And again, it kind of goes back to that question of, like, reform versus creating entirely new systems, because, like, the ultimate objectives are like the North Star for everything that you do. So I think that's a good call out.
I want to kind of pose the question of, like, are there any institutions that don't have a faulty foundation or that weren't built on like really compromised values? Because I can't think of too many. Like, even just like looking at American history, like, and the foundation of our forefathers, like, they had morals and values that obviously don't translate to today. And so I think that if essentially every institution is kind of plagued with the same issue, how can you kind of evolve or like be responsive to that faulty foundation?
Can I pose a question in relation to Chabu's question? Is it possible for humanity, who I think we all recognize is imperfect in one form or the other, to build a perfect institution?
Yeah, I was gonna, the answer that popped in my mind, totally unfinished, Chabu, to your thing, was the only like institutions grounded in like a beautiful belief are religions, in my opinion, and not the church, not like the Greek Orthodox Church or like anything like that, or the Catholic Church, but like religions themselves, I think, are grounded in like a set of good beliefs. At least most of them are, and I think that humans are inherently flawed and like co-opt it for negative reasons, as we can go on and on about that. But yeah, I don't. Matt, to your question, I have no clue, but religion is the only thing that popped into my mind there.
Yeah, and Matt, for your question, I don't think that it's possible for us to build a perfect institution or a perfect anything, but like the place that you start at getting better is like creating those objectives, right? Like, it's only going to get worse if the objectives, the metric that you create, are impediments to human flourishing. So it's like we can strive for a more perfect institution, but not going to actually get there.
How much do you think there's a relation between people, the state of people, and the state of their institutions? That I'm curious about. You guys mentioned education before, right? So it's one thing to say that at one point it was decided that there should be universal education, right? What they understood to be universal education at that time, I'm sure, is a heck of a lot different than what we understand universal education. So I'm just curious, like, when it comes to like global governance, which we'd say is very removed from subsidiarity, right? We're talking very, very top. Is it possible to even effectively build any kind of government if there isn't a certain level of, I don't say human development or human flourishing going on? And how important do you think human flourishing would be in order to establish a global government? Sorry, that's a lot of questions.
Well, I think to the first one, what is the relationship between people and their institutions? I think it's very self-evident that people and their institutions develop in tandem, and that both sides of, I guess, both subjects in this question are not static, but they're continuously evolving in response to each other. Like Madison, you brought up education. We have our set, or when education, specifically in the United States, was established, we did have our set goals. But if you notice the evolution of the US education system over time, you start to notice that the education system evolved in response to the culture. So for instance, at first we started with prioritizing educating students for the purpose of participating in democracy. But then as we move into the Industrial Revolution and the era of social engineering, right, we start to see people prioritize social efficiency in education and so on and so forth. So definitely long answer cut short, yes, institutions and people are forever intertwined because people make up the institutions and people build these institutions. So to the second question, how hard would it be to build a global government focused on human flourishing? Well, very hard, considering the fact that it's 2021 and we still haven't figured out a way to do it. Partially because the culture isn't currently, or the mainstream culture isn't allowing us to do so. Human flourishing requires that we not only respect our rights to live, but we respect the rights of other people to live, and to live without anyone impending on their own freedoms. But we don't follow that because we believe that whether it be countries or interpersonal relationships, we believe that we must flourish at the expense, regardless of whether or not our flourishing comes at the expense of everyone else. So if we're going to build an institution that is not necessarily perfect, but continuously strives to be perfect, we need to embed those objectives into the institutions to begin with. Objectives that ensure that we aren't, once again, it goes back to the culture of care. We just need to make sure that we care about other people. Super fruity, super light, but I think that when you care, everything else comes with it. Being aware of your responsibility to other humans, to the earth, etc. Ensuring that you hold other people, other governments accountable. Yeah.
Kind of in response to this last question, I think that the relationship between people and the institution is there for sure, but what makes it hard to build a global government focused on human flourishing is the fact that the people evolve way quicker than our institutions do. And so we can have this awareness or awakening within society, but it will take Congress not 100 years, but something close to it, or something that feels like it, to kind of be responsive to it. And so I think that our institutions don't move as quickly with us. And so because of that, if human flourishing was to take place and to genuinely thrive, institutions would almost lag behind in that. And it kind of, slows the snowball effect that could easily take place. When I think about the summer and the Black Lives Matter movement, that was flourishing in our sense of community in my eyes. But our institutions were not responsive or conducive to that flourishing. So it kind of ruined, the traction that was building, or kind of hindered that process to a degree.
Yeah, I think on that point, a lot of institutions are built to maintain the status quo because at the time the people in power are comfortable. And again, not a shot at people in power, but I think that we make the mistake of building things that maintain instead of building things that are very modular and easily pivotal. We build in my mind, it's a huge aircraft carrier that takes hours to turn instead of a bunch of really small boats that can do more really quickly. And I think as technology expands and as we become more interconnected, we are missing all these opportunities in education, in work, and all these to build precedents and traditions and institutions that can pivot really quickly and keep up with the collective mind, right? Technology is the first thing that humanity has built that can outpace it, right? So the fact that we're not leveraging that to create better societies for ourselves right now is pretty unfortunate. And I think it's because we're scared of breaking the status quo. And the institutions are just resistant to it because that's the nature of their purpose.
I mean, this just makes me want to pose the question, how do you create an organizing system that is able to constantly evolve?
Yeah, well, I think it starts from the people that are laying the foundation. They have to be, well, I think they have to embody what the organizing system is on the individual level. Like if they're not constantly evolving and like learning from the world and using that to shift their own lifestyle, it's like you really expect them to do that for a much more like a wider system with multiple people. They're also just not going to be good role models, right? So like do we think that Biden or Trump are like paragons of like personal evolution? Maybe one more than the other, right? But far from embodying like what like the future of governance like systems could look like.
Can you guys name any institutions, examples that you think would be best examples we have of highly adaptable, transnational, global?
Apple, Amazon, huge tech corporations, period, pharma.
I was going to say Apple.
Yeah, they're all driven by the wrong thing. They have the wrong priority. Not a social. They have some of the wrong priorities. But they are very, very good at keeping up with the times to fulfill their goal, because in order to fulfill their goal of making a bunch of money, they need to keep up with the times. So they're built to be able to pivot and iterate and create new things.
I think organizing systems that constantly evolve are values and dream driven over goal driven. I think when the goal of an organizing system is to like win or to get all the resources like and to be number one, then like that just creates I mean like goals, I don't know, I just feel like it's, I don't know where I was going with this, but
no, actually, I think it's a good point. I mean, why does Apple, Amazon, and stuff? Why do they win? I mean, what is it about their approach that enables them to win as over and above others?
Everyone's driving towards the same thing.
I think that's a good point about governance too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, it's a question about how you organize your organization, right? So does everybody has a say in everything? So will that make it quicker to make decisions? Or do you rather build your organization in a hierarchy, you know, with somebody on at the top that makes the decision and it kind of trickles down? So that's a question I would like to pose. Like, what do you think? Is it more helpful to have an organization that's organized in a hierarchy, or something like a democracy? So what?
And I want to pose a question on Vivien's question. And if you think of the world's problems today, what organizations would you think are most effective at collectively addressing them? Because I think it connects to Vivien's as well. Which ones are most effective?
I think this is an interesting duality that I'm about to propose, but in the same way that like Apple is able to achieve an end goal because the end goal is money, grassroots organizations that are resolving like really, really local niche problems are equally effective in the sense that like they have a very singular goal, which is to like get every kid in school in that community. And they are able to do that, or to get like 100 kids in school in that community, and they're able to do that. So I think that like when your end goal is really concise, and tangible.
Mm.
Even in the absence of like explicit leadership, you know how to like guide your decision making. Like the North Star is easy to be responsive to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what that makes me think of is how there was one of the people on this call, their school, because they were optimizing for high school graduation rates, they would expel kids that they didn't think were going to graduate and not count them as ever having been enrolled.
Yeah, they that was a fun time to deal with. It's I also think like in an ideal world, sure, I would love a global like one monarchy ruling the entire world, because if everybody was perfect, then I would have nothing to worry about. But I think that I read this book called Humanocracy that Gary suggested. I don't know if anyone else read it, but there's just such an interesting thing about like decentralized communities, like local communities, all coming together to form, I guess what you can say is governance around like corporations and stuff. And what I'm thinking more of is like the role of governance might be to be the bridger between these grassroots, more like active and actionable arms of change and of society, and like these huge corporations and that have the money, power, just more ability to do so. Not a complete thought, but.
So what that makes me think of is, and this can be a new provocation, I guess, governance versus the distinction between governance and coordination.
Well, can I ask a question in relation to that? Maybe it'll help get the organizations that you guys would think of, that would be collectively responsible for coordinating responses to global problems. How effective would you say they are right now? And if you're critical of them, why?
In my eyes, governance is coordination of competing priorities all over the world, and doing that in a way that kind of like is satisfactory to, everyone who's involved and invested. So that means everyone. So if governance is coordination of competing priorities, I think that the organizations that are in charge of coordinating right now are doing a horrible job, simply because they're not coordinating everyone's priorities. They're coordinating like the priorities of a handful or a select few. And so that is their failure, in the sense that like things rarely translate to being effective, no matter like how many things they put out, how many big agendas roll out every year or out of every conference, because like what happens in applying that decision making is really contingent on like how a very handful, few powerful G7 type group of people resonate with like how to address or gain those goals in some way.
I'm always really critical of the United Nations and of the EU and of the US government. But if you think about it, there are two ways to fix a problem, right? It's working within the system or working outside of the system to build a new one. I think the UN does a great job of working within the system. Like they've done great work. It's not like everything they've done has been pointless. They just work within a bureaucratic system where the norms are slow and stagnant and working for a select group of people. So I wonder, like, to your question, Matthew, is there a point in governance, in global coordination and global governance now, when we can't even get like our communities to agree that they're living in the same universe of fact and the same universe of life? How effective will a global organization be in uniting people that can't even unite with their neighbors?
Well, so what? Such a great question, and what a few of us were talking with Matthew earlier today, and he was emphasizing the importance of thinking about root causes versus symptoms, and those aren't obviously, like sometimes a symptom can also be a root cause, but so we have to think about why do people kind of go to conspiracy theories. I think so much of it is because they're looking for answers for why their life is the way that it is. So if you like, I think we're biased here because we think that developing a human flourishing framework could be helpful, right? But I'll speak for myself. I truly believe that pointing to a better future can actually get a lot of people that would be surprised that they're working that they are working on the same thing together. So foundation of reality, like the reason why it's there's a huge schism is because no one is like providing like the light at the end of the tunnel. A big part of it, I think.
I also think like there's a problem when someone is telling you what reality is. Like when there is like when you're told that this is the foundation of reality and you need to like believe it, like I feel like it's part of why people can't agree on it is because we aren't preparing people to ask questions and go make sense of the information they need to decide on their own what reality is. And I feel like it is through that dialogue where we can reach consensus.
Sienna.
I just want to emphasize what Ashley just said in the sense that like by telling people what reality is, you're also discrediting their vision of reality. And just like that's like disrespectful, like even on an instinctual level, like for you to have to inform me, you're insinuating that I am not aware of like the realities, and they are realities, they just happen to be like realities of my world instead of your world, if that makes sense. So I think that's a really good point.
And to connect this global governance, I've got a question for you guys as well. So let's say that the reality is that we've been told our whole lives that we need government and that government's what's holding the whole world from complete and utter chaos and everything else, right? And that government is there for our best interests and is capable of taking on those big. I want to throw in someone like Elon Musk, right? So if we're talking about the global climate crisis, right, where a global government you think was what we need to tackle this crisis, if we were, we're thinking how we're supposed to think, and you look at Elon Musk's contribution to helping us at least start the journey of tackling this global climate crisis. How does that individual and the companies he's created to tackle it, how does that weigh and stack against global government contribution or the international organizations and stuff like that we've just tended to always rely on to solve these problems? I mean, if the point of government is to accelerate human flourishing and help solve our collective problems, I don't know. It's curious to me that Elon Musk's contribution without any real government support aside from contracts, the disproportionate impact he's had. So I'm curious to get your reaction to that.
I just think that there needs to be an overall more realization now, or like a more of like realizing of our individual and collective potential to make contributions, right? Like I know that a lot of times I went before CU, like I defaulted to government is the only one who can make meaningful contributions. And so I just think that people like Elon showing us the possibilities is so important, and arguably like individual contribution is the most important because as we establish like organizing systems, governments, whatever, they aren't built to constantly evolve, and they're like they move at such a slow pace. Like individual contribution is the contribution we should be focusing on.
I think oh, go for it.
No, I was gonna say, and your individual contribution could be working within the system as well. So it's like a perfect framework, right? Everyone can do more than they're probably already doing or better.
Yeah, something that I actually said in the beginning about trust it comes to mind, like government is predicated upon a distrust of the population. And I think that it says a lot about how you think of humanity and like an individual's, like if people are naturally good or bad, if you answer the question, can an individual impact the world as much as government can? Because I think when, as I was with you there, Madison, but then I realized like the system of government is just built upon like not trusting people to do things for themselves. And that's kind of dumb. I don't know. A very insightful point from me, kind of dumb, but that's what I feel.
To ask your point, remember, I don't know if you guys heard the story about how Elon Musk was complaining about the fact he was trying to launch his starships and that the regulatory agencies just keep getting in the way and slowing them down. He was complaining, saying, listen, it's an iterative process. Yes, there's explosions, but you got to let us do our thing. But you know, that those regulators are they're following the law, right? They're government appointed, they have responsibilities, and they're trying to protect the common good within this scope. It's an interesting, it's an interesting clash, right? The guy who's trying to accelerate and push forward, the space agenda and stuff like that, and he's saying we got to move, and then a regulatory body, which is just trying to protect, the common good and stuff, but gets highly criticized because they're out of date and stuff. And anyways, just curious. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think it's a really good. I think it's a good example of what you're talking about, Thanasi.
I mean, it just reminds me of like that whole like labs of democracy thing, right? Where like experiments happen at the smallest levels. And like, I mean, individual contributions are where like iteration and prototyping and moving fast can happen. And the government's job is literally to identify and adopt the experiments that are working. Because like, if there is just the inherent challenge that governments are not great at moving fast, like you need to trust someone else to do that.
Yeah, what this kind of reminds me of is Hannah Arendt's like philosophy on evil and stuff, of how just people that are sitting around going with the flow can contribute to mass amounts of evil. I think the same principle applies with like holding society back. Like I have to go get my passport renewed because it's 6 months before it expires, and I'm going to wait like 8 hours just because people are working not mindlessly, but they don't care that the system is broken and they're not doing anything to fix it.
I do think though that in the same way that like capital is not distributed equally right now, like our contributions also won't be distributed equally, if that makes sense. Like the expectation is different depending on like what privilege you have to leverage when it comes to like these institutions, especially government. So when it comes to like individual contributions and how they stack up against governments, like we get more from people like Elon Musk because again, like his distribution of capital is like immensely different than most people. And so I think it's less so a question of like the contributions of the individual and more so a question of like, what does someone have to give? Like how much are they able to kind of put into things like government?
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, right? Is like a lot of people see money as like one of the only means to contributing to like a more flourishing society. So it's like people have to know that their contributions are worth it, and like even the smallest scale things like like within your family or your friends, your smaller communities is contributing to a better world. Just needs to be recognized and almost like praised more, as opposed to just monetary contributions.
Yeah, and I kind of just want to kind of also add on what Chabu was saying. I think my like mental model of like contribution in the past was that like everyone needs to contribute equally. Like if I am donating $100, like I want my sisters to donate $100. If they're not going to do it, like I'm not going to do it. And like I feel like that I mean, yeah, like it's just so important to realize that not everyone is going to be contributing equally. And I don't think we should be measuring contribution through like I don't know, like physical number. I mean, that sounds really like idealistic, but like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think we need new ways of measuring contribution that is not dependent on, proportional to ability. I like how Thanasi says that.
Yep, makes sense. Madison, should we head to reflection?
Yes, we can. I'm going to send a link to the notes so that you all can look over them. And then when you have your reflection ready, you can go ahead and shout it out. My reflection. I guess I'm just leaving with more questions. Kind of about the role, I'm not going to say a global government, I'm going to say of global governance, and just, I guess, what that looks like and how we can, like, what metrics, I guess I'm realizing, like, first we even need to get on the same page about, like, oh man, I'm just thinking about, like, not on the same page about, like, the foundations of reality, which I guess is what I would have said before, but, like, creating, like, objectives and like valuing people's individual contributions to like towards those objectives and visions.
I'm going to build off Madison, and I'm definitely leaving with more questions. And I think the one question that really stuck out to me that I'm going to keep thinking about is, how do you put a system in place that continuously evolves with society? I think that's kind of a really crucial part to all the other questions that were asked.
That's great. I'm gonna keep exploring this idea, this question of how do we motivate coordinated action I guess both through existing systems, but perhaps especially through systems we create anew. We have so much more. We talked a lot about how a lot of the foundations of our current systems were built on values or visions or priorities that don't align with what is needed now. So how can we build something that really helps us achieve those objectives and visions and brings everyone into the fold without making, while allowing people to have agency to, while empowering people to contribute in the way that feels empowering to them and also helps everyone else as well.
I guess mine is do we need global governments? Do we need government? I'm just actually what you said about trust, and then just a bunch of treks we had about chaos and stuff. And I'm just thinking, like, technically, theoretically, if we were to get to a point where everybody was flourishing and not everybody was thinking in a scarce mindset, there would be a lot less problems, interpersonal, intercommunity problems. Therefore, it would make government obsolete. So is the end goal flourishing, and is the byproduct of that a destruction of traditional government systems? Who knows? But
I'd like to build on that, because I think it's really interesting how this topic of distrust towards the government kept on popping up throughout our conversation. And I think that's a really big difference to our system here in Germany, at least from my point of view, because we very much rely on our government. I mean, we have a different system, where you can choose between a wide variation of parties to give your vote to, because maybe that might be a reason. But for me, the question, do we need global governance? It's not a question at all, because I really believe that's the only way how we can coordinate to tackle greater challenges like the climate crisis. And for me, I think I'd like to reflect on more is like on how can direct democracy work, like where really every single vote of every individual is heard and makes up the decisions. Because we've decided for a representative democracy, right? We give our votes to people who represent us, who then make the decisions. So there are a lot of advantages from that, but also through our talk, I could hear how many of us would be more satisfied with a democracy where really everybody could vote and have the same say instead of being represented. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this track has helped me just start delinking the ideas of government and governance. It's like almost a paradox that like government seems to be the vehicle for governance, but government also at times is an impediment to the goal of governance, which is to coordinate people for like efficiency and like agreement. So I guess like my question would be like, can we have governance without government? And if so, what does that look like?
Yeah, I agree with Ashley. I'm very much resonating with your reflection, especially going through the notes and my memories of this conversation, noticing how I specifically worded things when specifically me referring to governance/government and linking them with and, as if they require each other to function, like Ashley said. So I'm definitely going to reflect more on how we can build systems that don't require these strict hierarchical structures in order to prioritize international cooperation and coordination. And honestly, who said it? I think Vivien said that it's not really a question of whether or not we need global governance, because we do, and I definitely agree with that. I think we need to we need to empower the people who are currently thinking about how to develop a more decentralized horizontal system of governance that isn't predicated on hierarchy, and it just brings up a lot of questions, like when it comes to democracy, which I very much like. I very much like. How do we balance speed while trying to prioritize thoroughness in order to serve the various forms of diversity within the global community, Like, how do we harness and continue to support the amazing grassroots organizers that are currently doing the work to switch the culture that will lay the ground and the foundation to create systems of global governance that will ultimately serve us, Yeah, it's just so many questions. And I'm kind of reminded of this this anarchic term, Anarcho-Syndicalism, which is this idea that you should radically empower the working class in order to create a system that serves the proletariat or the majority. And I'm trying to think of ways that we could work syndicalist thought into creating systems of coordination that, once again, serve all of us.
The thing that I kind of walked away with is this question of, which I'm starting to wonder about more and more, is the global government we need and this kind of globalized one tribe kind of human vision we're moving towards, is it contingent upon global solidarity? Will we be able to achieve or realize the government we need to move quickly and tackle these huge issues if we can't even agree on basic kind of principles and at least a base vision of collectively what we need? So I think this connection between government and solidarity, I think, is key. And I think we focus a lot on the question of how do we create the right kind of government. And I think we looked at that a lot, but I think it's the wrong question. I think it's the more important question, I feel, is how can we more effectively achieve global solidarity? And I think once we have that, the issue of institution, I think, will just be a lot easier to formulate.
I think that's like such a good point. And what really came out of this conversation for me is the idea that like there is no like I knew that global governance was something that like had been disempowering more so than it had been empowering of collectives and individuals, but I didn't realize that like the idea of global governance just needed to be like redefined altogether, and that what we like the things that we use to describe global governance are so far from what governance can and should be. And so just like the absence of institutions worth referring to is really important. But in that same breath, it's also just like a call to action, like of where it's really important to plug in terms of like what's worth building next.
Yeah, and Gary, you can stop screen sharing. I just want to ask for if it was your first time on the Trek, what were your thoughts about the format and the Trek overall?
It was my first time, as you might have noticed. And I'm really new to CU. So this is kind of the first community format kind of thing I could join. And I'm just so impressed by all of your thoughts that are so well informed. I'm really impressed by the quality of conversation we've just had. Yeah, so thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for having me. It's really interesting. I think we should, I'm thinking about how we could use something like CU in Germany too. So, and I haven't experienced a conversation like this in a Zoom format with young persons, young leaders, and I'm really inspired by that. So thank you all.
I thought it was great too. I think it's a really powerful ideation platform. And I think that the fact that you have all these different individuals from different parts of the world is really advantageous. And this makes the ideation more fresh and interesting. Like I find, like my experience of, typically when you're getting people together to talk about these things, typically we're all have the same pedigree. We have a lot of the same thinking, and it really just isn't as interesting. So I love the fact this thing bounces from different places, and it's like, okay, well, that's interesting, that's cool, noted. Let's move on. Let's look at this issue now. And I like the pace, because so every one of these issues you guys brought up today could be a rabbit hole. You could spend multiple. You could spend 20 years on these topics. But I think right now as we're trying to get a greater sense of clarity and focus about what the priority of work should be for CU and what you guys should be spending your energy on. This is very cool.
Maddie, that's such a cool note, because now I'm realizing that sometimes we do it like we did today, where we have like so many different questions, but sometimes we'll like pick one question and go deep on it. So I think that's what I really like about the format too, is it gives you so much flexibility. Like if you want to go down one of those rabbit holes, you can, but also if like, okay, noted, like you said, that's interesting, let's move on. You can do that too. And we've done a wide variation of all of those. And so I really like that as well. But thank you all seriously so much for joining us. Would love to have you on a future Trek. And that's all. Matthew, have a great night. Vivien, I don't know what time it is for you.
Nighttime.
Nighttime. Okay, yeah. You two have a great night. Everyone else have a great rest of your day, and I will see you soon.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.